So now we'll move to the our last presentation.
Sorry.
We have Professor Santanu Chowdhury. He is the director of IIT Jodhpur, and he's well known
I don't know.
in his field. He's
We
a
shall get the connector.
recipient of various awards, Distinguished Alumni Award from IIT Kharagpur. He is a fellow of Indian National Academy of Engineering, the National Academy of Sciences. He is also fellow of International Association of Pattern Recognition. And his topic is digital preservation, which is something, a very, very important topic, because the way we are living in this digital world, everything is now born digital. And also, large heritage material, every media has certain life. It may be paper or print or microfilm or any kind of media. So every print media or non-print media has certain life. It will not survive for long. So how to migrate that to digital world and preserve it? So this is something a very much needed efforts and very much required technology. And we will definitely love to hear Professor Santanu Chowdhury about this topic. So over to Professor Santanu Chowdhury.
Good morning. See, I'm completely from a different profession altogether. So maybe my terminologies would be different. But I would like to talk about something that we are doing for a while in the space of heritage, and primarily using technologies from computer vision, graphics, knowledge-based systems, visualization, by trying to preserve in a digital space some of the heritage objects, build up mechanisms to actually represent and deliver and communicate. There may be issues in terms of perspective with which archaeologists would like to look at it in its pure form, the purity and other issues. We have tried to be as consistent as we could in terms of precisions of the data generated, but in presentations and others, we have taken kind of a creative liberty. So I first would like to apologize on that ground. So obviously the reason for this is clear, that because we are losing both tangible and intangible heritage for various reasons, the whole question is, can we preserve the things which are having a threat of disappearance in the digital space? So today's talk, I shall talk about some archiving effort in digital space, both tangible and intangibles, and AR, VR based some applications. In fact, this may not be very attractive in terms of the examples that we have seen from Sarah, but we would like to show that what is happening in this country and with something which is part of Indian heritage. So obviously heritage in digital space has touched all aspects of the heritage. In fact, the talks today is indicative of that. And we would like to bring in that also in a discourse of studies. When we talk in an engineering stream or in computer science, in electrical engineering, the different aspects of scientific things which are away from maybe classical architecture or civil engineering, but from a different perspective to look at problem. So this is also an attempt towards that direction in what we are doing. So primarily I shall describe outcome of a structured research effort which was really supported by DST, and it was an activity where about 21 institutes across the country, both in engineering as well as in social sciences, archaeology and humanities, participated. And there it's also a very important point to look at is trying to understand each other's language. Nothing substantive can happen if we cannot understand each other. I think this project at least achieved that in terms of understanding each other's language and idioms and trying to move forward. So the work was focused around Hampi. And Hampi is capital of Vijayanagara Empire, which was in AD 1336 to 1646. I shall quickly show some of the slides of that place just to introduce it to others who might not know about it. So this is located in North Karnataka. And these are different zones in which this area is divided. And there are temples primarily located in the core zone. And these are some of the ancient capital hills, because the story of Hampi goes back to Ramayana. That is, in fact, so therefore there is years and years of these traditional anecdotes, constructions, all embedded in that space. So these are some of these boulders. These boulders are also, is actually dated the oldest objects in Hampi. And this is the river, and these are the gateway to Hampi, and archaeological and excavated sites. This is an aerial view of the temple and its bazaar. This whole activity was around it. And this is a layout of one of the sacred structures, one of the temples in Hampi. And the cultural landscapes comes up because lots of performing arts has also around Hampi has developed. So it was a site picked up both for tangible as well as intangible heritage. And these are the ruins, temple complexes. And therefore, what was the whole project was about? Is collaborative project between researchers in the area of technology and humanities for digital documentation and interpretation of tangible and intangible heritage. So let's look at the features, what kind of work that was done. I shall not get into technology. I shall just give a brief overview of the things done. So obviously we did 3D scanning. There's a major effort of 3D scanning of the temple complexes. Obviously we could not do an exhaustive scan of everything, but most important structures were all scanned. And we created 3D point cloud data, then went to 3D mesh model, and their representations, all these things which Professor Datta had talked about that we did with the temples in Hampi. And the other thing also we did is, other than 3D scanning, to be able to have a low-cost technology, we developed the entire pipeline of image-based rendering to generate 3D point cloud from pure image data. And which is actually photogrammetry being talked about, but photogrammetry requires calibrated images. We actually developed a technology where we tried to make uncalibrated handheld images, cameras taking images and trying to align and create the point cloud. There are discrepancies and errors, and these errors we corrected with reference to the 3D laser scanned data. So the whole idea was that if we can mature this technology, it will become a very low-cost tool to model any of the heritage sites which are there in the country, where with the limited 3D scanning, because 3D scanning is a costly affair, with the 3D limited scanning and taking these exhaustive photographs, we can actually create 3D model. And this technology is now more or less stabilized and available globally as well as in the Indian context and with us. Now the next thing that we did, since we had the geometric data, and as Professor Datta was talking about, making use of these Vastu Shastras and the descriptions that was there of the temples, we actually used CAD models and tried to place the CAD models of conjectured structures which are missing today. And in fact, this temple, the top part was missing, and this whole thing was reconstructed and a consistency check was done. We are not claiming that's a kind of archaeologically or a historically correct reconstruction, but a hypothesized reconstruction. So these are some of the examples that we did with visually reconstructed models. This reconstruction is slightly different from, the connotation of the word is slightly different from reconstruction in computer vision. So if you see the chariot image, the top of the chariot, chariot in a temple in Hampi was missing, and that was hypothesized, and was created. And in fact, this is the original. This was an image taken in 18th century, in 19th century, early 19th century. This is what is today, and this is what was visually reconstructed, and through 3D printing created a replica with this part indicating which was hypothesized. So these are different monuments in the digital space and the originals. We are trying to show how faithfully we try to reconstruct this stuff. And therefore, this is the process by which, in fact, I'm not going into the details of looking into the structural symmetry and integrity and build up the things which were really missing. Obviously, this was a part of reconstruction. There are also issues of restorations of things. Now, there are a number of sculptures which have been destroyed. And we wanted to hypothesize the way they are. And we actually use a tensor-based reconstruction in the space consisting of 3D geometry as well as that of textures. And these are work where this is a broken, if you see, this is a broken 3D model. We actually made use of the data collected over different temple samples which was available on the internet, used elements of machine learning on a tensor-based representation of the space, and reconstructed these missing parts. Okay? The work which is being done is actually of a collaborative effort of a project. This was primarily contributed by IIT Madras. So if you see, there are more examples of this. This is an example where in a pillar where both, if you see that what I wanted to show was that the reconstruction is also in painting with the texture, not just only geometry. And there is a zoomed in results. So you will find that the closer, it's extremely similar replica of what has been done and consistency. This is in terms of digital restorations of the paintings. Trying to use the geometry, because in painting doesn't explicitly take care of the geometry and geometrical constraints. But here, based on that, it was in painted restorations. So all these are restorations in the digital space. And now here we actually did this super resolution. So the point is where I can move as close as possible to the actual, in fact, a digital replica of the actual monument, and look into the details of how it has been built up. So that whole data and the super resolution based reconstruction had been worked out to provide the navigational interface. This work is on enhancement of inscription images. So there are a number of inscriptions to deal with it and how to have them in a digital space. So in fact, some of these recognitions and intermediate results, and if you see here, is how we actually take it up and make a clean representations which may be even editable and interpretable directly. So therefore, these experiencing artifacts is another part of it. So what we did was, this is a kind of work which was done using haptic sensors. Why? Because there are these musical pillars. Now, I have so far shown the entire digital representation of the material which is available visually, but how to have the musical pillars represented. So there was recording of these whole data, and then there was a haptic interface created so that given a digital representation of the temple and through the haptic devices, you can actually play music on those pillars. Obviously, there is a difference between actually what you get, but you cannot actually play on the pillars. It is not permitted today. Only with specific permissions of ASI you can actually experience that, but through this process you can have a sense of how these musical pillars really work. Then also we created an interface for ceiling paintings of Virupaksha temple. We did a very high resolution recording of these paintings, and we created an interactive plan of temple ceiling, and so you can move around. As you move around using this plan, you can see the different parts of these murals and their annotations. In fact, murals has its own grammar. And understanding a mural, following that grammar, the story, is also a very important part of experiencing those paintings. And these navigational interface provided that kind of an input. So you can get the whole story which is being put there. The other part that we looked at is, can we have a recreation of the social life? How do we talk about recreation of the social life? So we had our collaborators who are in the design space and designing of clothes. So the entire historical literature was scanned to create models of the different clothing culture of Vijayanagara time. And to clothing styles and terms, because there are descriptions and the literatures, so that was followed up, and these styles were actually sketched. These are all manually sketched, and models were made. And they were actually used, so murals and stucco, to derive the color palette also. It's not only the style, but color palette is different because these are all natural colors. The availability of the pigments and the local vegetable colors dictated the color models. So this was done there. And therefore there was a whole hierarchy of the garment clothing was made. And they were also looked at the way they are put on and different categories of people, how they were doing clothing. So it's a complete digital space of the social aspects of dress, putting on the dress and draping. And then go into the market, which I talked about, and market has been written in a big way in the literatures around Hampi. And we tried to do a visual reconstruction of the market, then developed the complete 3D reconstruction model and the animation model. And to create, because I don't have the animation film, I'm not showing it here, to just create a sense of that marketplace. So it's actually, we attempted a creation of the social fabric in a digital space, which can also have an educational experience for a student studying history at that point in time. So if you see, this is outside Mandapa, how the whole thing was used. In fact, this doesn't exist today. These are part of the literature, part of the things which are remaining, and the entire thing was built up. So these are some of these examples. That is where if you see, this is an example where real-world textual synthetic models and through environmental rendering has been placed together to give a sense. So this is some shots from the animation film. Then therefore we did also lots of digital documentation of the existing things which are happening over there. So these are all the picture archives. We created a picture archives of the living traditions and the handicrafts. So also there is a museum, and the museum has different artifacts. So we needed to create interface for this museum to scan. So this is an interface which was created, which is a very common mobile-based interface, Museum AR, which was done, with which you can actually get the data, just like a kind of a QR code, you can get the data and use it. So these are all done and it's available. So this is, as I was talking about, the digital, we developed tools for annotation of murals by experts. And then we went into a kind of a knowledge-based, ontology-based representation of this collective knowledge of that space. So actually what we said is an experiential exploration interface, which is not just visual interface, where we say that if I have an ontology, that is specification of the entire conceptual model of the culture of Hampi of that age, I can have a visualization, and visualization in terms of present, how the different things are linked, and it can be a visualization through the past, where both tangibles and intangibles come together into one interface. And this whole thing was built around this temple. So this is the knowledge representation of, in terms of the ontological context in which the temples were built, and linking it with the socio-cultural events and the cultural practices which were followed at that point in time. Even it was linked with the literature and the mythological stories which were taken up in terms of representation through those temples and temple sculptures and mural paintings. So we can have view the video, read the text, compare with images, watch videos, recordings. So it's a kind of a computer-based interface where you can use different spots and travel around. Okay, it's a kind of a video-linked video, a hyperlinked video over a 2D interface. There can be multiple paths. These are adaptive paths. Because of the knowledge model that we had, this is use of AI to provide you an adaptive path to navigate over the space. So I'm not going into, therefore, collaboration between technologies and humanities did something. So I would like to show that where we have moved around from there. And therefore, there is a book, if you're interested to look into this. Also, there is, we actually taken and translated this whole know-how generated through this project through few startups. One of the startup is Vizara, which is actually was incubated at IIT Delhi. And this whole idea was that translation and delivery products in the space of digital heritage. So that this activity can be used as a service for a number of cultural sites where the government may be interested in. So these are different activities. I wanted to show that now this whole support was, DST is supporting us, and DST is now looking at Kashi Vishwanath, Taj Mahal, Hazara Rama Temple, Rani Ki Vav, and Sun Temple. These are the projects where this kind of a digital recreation is being attempted. And we have created the replicas, 3D printed scaled down replicas, so that you can actually experience them. So therefore, without even visiting the site, you can have a pre-knowledge of the site by experience them and getting this whole data with you. And this is the whole pipeline with which this process has been set up. That I have a 3D point cloud to mesh conversion, merging of CAD models with mesh and textures. It's a huge volume of data. So it's also a kind of a big data management problem, and set up the cars for installation structures, and then you can have walkthrough over there. So if you see here, this is the whole process which are being shown for some of the cases. This is actually the temple complex where we have the complete 3D point cloud data available with us. And main shrine of the temple with the textures. Then actually the cloud meshing was done, and how the magic wrap were used for meshing. So therefore, this whole technology, I'm not getting into it. And if you see here, these 3D CAD models, and this is CAD models with precise measurements because we have done the scanning. And this is how the whole volume of the data reduces. Why it is important is that if we want to do, there can be a very high resolution storage at one place, but also we can have variety of volumes at which data is stored, and can be created a library of these models, library of such temples around. And so how the mesh models went through this 3D printing, the processes, and this is a complete virtual structures for realistic effect that textures and the paints were applied. And if you see this, almost as close as possible texturally to what they are today in terms of certain lighting conditions. And these are now different pre-processing as 1:43 scale and 3D printed and the lights. And these are the kiosks which has been created through which you can experience them. In fact, if some of you are interested, I think Anupama is there from Vizara. She would like to show them here. They are already at IIT Delhi. Right now, these kiosks are available. And so therefore, for different monuments, it has been done. And the screen here is actually experiencing the stuff. This is in a full scale, how it looks like. And I can just show the video, maybe, if it works. So there is also a projection mapping from the top. And you can navigate with the laser pointer. In fact, so as you move your laser pointer, these are the footprints. That is the path you travel actually. I guess skipping, I think, for the sake of time. See, the other thing that if you look into it, we also developed a technology for holographic projection for 3D rendition of some of these performing arts on these temple complexes. Since we have created the 3D models, we can have also empty spaces in between. And there, some of these performance, which used to be happen in these temples, we have created this through holographic projection. Let me see if that... So this is a holographic projection in the space of the 3D reconstructed temples. These are 3D printed temples. This is physically, you can go to the temple, the reconstructed, and can see these performances inside. Because they were used for these kind of performance. So these similar things we are trying to talk about an interface of a film library. If you look into it in a 3D space, you can have again a networked information system. And with a networked information system, there can be, it's a 3D space, you can navigate. This is an ongoing work, which is navigation, that you can get into a plot, and then you can select it from a library, and you can actually look into it. So it's a kind of a 3D navigational space for accessing film. So that's another way of looking at it. So another space which we are looking at is basically, one is that why we can save the traditions, but also there are people involved into those traditions. There's a whole question of livelihood, the sustenance of the livelihood as well as digital preservation. So we are trying to do some exercise with daddies which are made in Jodhpur primarily by migrated families. And we have an interdisciplinary research group of digital humanities at IIT Jodhpur. In fact, whatever work I have shown so far is primarily done during my association with IIT Delhi. Even lots of things are actually in a demonstrated form at IIT Delhi. That's why I'm inviting you, can have a look at it. This is the work that we have started once I shifted to IIT Jodhpur. This is for, that is for migrated families. That is something which comes out of it. And this is done, this very, very family tradition. Therefore, what we wanted to do is that there are of different kinds of things which gets into it. An interlocked wave, and it's part of a material culture of Marwar, where Jodhpur is located. They can be tourist souvenirs, functional, as well as artistic objects. And economically, they are getting exploited. Since they are getting exploited, there's also a challenge in the Indian context, why many of these arts are dying. The next generation simply doesn't want to get into it, okay? And they have to provide, through digital mechanism, you have to provide sustenance, to provide a bigger avenue for marketing. And this was whole idea of actually taking up this initiative. And so what we are trying to do is that ethnographic chronicling of Dari waving in Salwa. Salwa is a place in Jodhpur. And designs and motifs typically used in Daris, and wave featured of Dari weavers, because that also is a documentation of their family life. Because the entire family life is built around this work. And we can have the design innovations, because see, the problem also comes up is repetitiveness of the designs. They need to give given opportunities for looking into how they can come up with new ways of looking at it. So this is a project we have taken, therefore, working on a digital documentation of the weavers, their Daris, their families, ethnographic chronicle of Dari weaving as livelihood and way of life in Salwas, because this requires a socioeconomic studies. So we are not now just looking at digital preservation, but trying to link it with a socio-economic context of this art, and how we can bring in this digital space to their support. And there are two key things we are looking at. One is digital combinatorics of motifs for new design, preserving character of Daris. So actually computational geometry and graphics comes in from computer science to generate possibly new motifs for these Daris, which they can really wave. And therefore, waving constraints gives rise to challenge of designing new sets of algorithms, that is from a digital space. And we are trying to look at digital marketing as well. So it's a kind of digital preservation, also trying to link it up with the sustenance of these people who make Daris. This is a project that we have undertaken, and we are working on it. So, conclusions, digital heritage science, which we are actually being engaged in, is very exciting and interesting. And also it requires, in the Indian context, different agencies to come together and work together. In at many contexts, we actually face the scenarios of ownership of the domains and not being able to accommodate others in the domains. And this is a problem in the country. I'm sorry to say, I have been in this space working with various agencies for more than last 10 years, okay? And I've faced this difficulty and problem. And this is the core bottleneck why we are not being able to scale up these processes for a variety of architectural sites for which India can be really proud of. And things are happening through external agencies, through variety of ways, but trying to preserve their boundaries, you don't work with each other. We want to live in silos. I think this has to be broken. And therefore we are also organizing, this is an invitation to all of you, International Heritage Symposium and Exhibition on 15 to 16 January at National Museum, New Delhi. We're trying to get all the stakeholders on board, including secretaries of different departments together, so that at least we can have a dialogue on a common space, and if possible, if people really do agree, take this forward through collaboration of different government agencies. The government agencies have to come together to have this kind of an initiative built in the country. There are activities across IITs, triple IIT, in fact Johor is sitting here, who has been a very forefront in these activities in this whole project. Technology institutes are interested to work. Maybe Ministry of Culture also interested to support this. but we have to break silos and come together. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chowdhury, for excellent presentation. I'm so happy, and I'm sure all have really enjoyed it, and it was very informative. And you mentioned digital preservation, and access is a very important component of it. I request all my presenters to please come on dais. We can have some time for question answer. One last thing you mentioned about the collaboration. This is, I fully agree with you. The organization which I represent, Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, we have plenty of such information. We have done a lot of work on these areas. For last 14 years I have been associated with. I never received any proposal from IITs or any institution to collaborate with us on these areas. We have plenty of work we have done, lot of documentation, lot of resources. We have live performances, in these areas, like it may be Hampi or many other projects we have been working. So now, if anybody wants our material, our resources, we'll be happy to do it. Now, we have very limited time for question answer, but
Sir?
still, I would like to have few questions. So now, please ask your question and also address to whom your question is addressed.
A very good morning to experts. My question is I'm having two queries. First one is to Dr. Sara. You have shown 3D models, many of the 3D models, but creating the 3D models using various types of softwares and cameras, which is expensive. But after working a lot, I can use Mushrooms as open source software. I have used it, and which will give me the point clouds and the mesh clouds, points, every data. I can zoom in, zoom out, as well as I can increase the depth of the wireframe. So, and then take it to the Blender for remodeling it. Are you using any other open source software, or you are using any subscribed software?
So we use a whole range of open source software, especially in the photogrammetry space, because it's boomed, right? And so there's a lot out there available for us. In the early days of virtual reality, right, there was nothing open source. So, and maybe the complexity of the systems we were building, they're not built for massive clusters of computers. So at that level, we're still working, but we've just developed a new synchronization framework for big cluster-based rendering, and this is open source, and we're able to share it with the community this year for this kind of work. So we're not only using open source, we're creating tools for other people to be able to do this kind of work.
Okay. My second query is to the panel itself. Especially in Dr. Sara's slides, you have shown immersive virtual world. Are you using Second Life, or you are using any grid, open grid, like OpenSim?
We use open, not Second Life, no. So typically, a lot
Right
of
now there are these two platforms, one Second Life, which are subscribed, and you can use, but that needs a lot of techniques and technologies for installing the
I think what
OpenSim.
you do during tea break, you interact with Sarah and have more questions. So we have very limited time.
Okay.
There's more questions.
Thank you. This is Professor Mesbah, University of Dhaka, Department of Information Science Library Management. I'm very much thankful to all of speakers that have given good presentation here. So nowadays, LAM, Library Archive and Management, called is a knowledge center. So how can we correlate with all of your works with the digital library system as well as NDLI? Could you please share any of you, especially Dr. Sara?
So I started that speech with this quote by G.B. Good from the Smithsonian Institute, who said 120 years ago that the library and the future museum is a merger of the library and the laboratory, essentially. So I think what's extraordinary about libraries is that they have always been information providers, and they're so much better equipped for the digital age than museums and cultural heritage. So in fact, in many ways of thinking in digital curation, the libraries are far ahead. Yeah. I also see that the many libraries that I know now also want to be exhibition spaces. They don't just want to live in the virtual world. They want to have a physical corollary to that world. And they have many important manuscripts and objects which they want to share physically. And so there's a real appreciation in libraries of the work that museums have been doing to valorize or to interpret using digital tools. So I think there's a real synergy there. I hope that answers your question to a start, to a degree.
Thank you, Sarah. And last question.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Malthus, working in Arunachal Pradesh. Then my question is to Santanu sir. Literally, he took me to my home state. I'm basically from Karnataka, northern Karnataka, and that too very near to Hampi. The last part you have shown, the digital part of the dance, whether are they the performers now, the present performers, or the same 3D model of the performers? And the rendering, which are the Karnataka music, and one of my friend, he's from Karnataka University, Dharwad. He did a PhD on the musical instruments of Hampi. He's basically from Hampi, Dr. Pandit Hawaldar. So I want to know that Karnataka music, the instruments they were using that time, and the rendering of now, right now, the model, which are the dances they're using, whether those are 3D models or performing artists of present.
Yeah, let me just answer these. Obviously, this is not the old, this not like an animation things, we did not do it.
Okay.
It's an actual recording of the current dance performances.
Okay.
So the musical instruments used is also current.
Okay.
Okay, so but there are, I know it was actually, some documentation was done for that.
Okay.
In case of an animation film, we tried to create animated characters following those dressing styles, etc.
Okay.
But this is a live performance, but holographically projected, so you can see a 3D inside the temple, 3D printed temples.
The same case with that musical
think
pillars.
dear,
Just
Interact with him during tea break. Because somebody is holding the mic since long, I want to give last questions to him.
Thank you so much.
This is really for the Indian members of the Indian panelists. You are creating, in your techniques, the way you develop your software, you are creating valuable intellectual property. I'm not suggesting that you make this into a commercial proposition, that's your choice, of course, but you should, I feel, identify it. It should be credited to you if you want to use it on, you want to make it available on open source, or however, make it available to other institutions, or however you do it. I feel that since it is your property that you have created, you should be aware of its value and have it identified as yours. I'm a lawyer, that's why I raised the point.
Yeah, see, actually, if, let me just tell you, there are two parts to it. One part of it is the data. Okay, making data available on the public, because some of the cases, the data we have taken from Archaeological Survey of India, obviously they own the data. Some of the data we have generated, which through DST, we are in the process of making it available publicly. The software tools, many of the tools are already available in a public domain. And some of the more additional tools. In fact, if you see the IP is primarily in terms of putting things together, trying to actually associate things so that I create a visualization. And tools used are not really proprietary tools used. Some of the algorithms, in fact, image-based rendering,
There are lots of work done in terms of the algorithm developments, and those are actually published papers. So those tools and those knowledge are available in a public space.
Thank you, Professor Chowdhury, Professor Datta, Professor Sara, for excellent presentation. Please give them a big round of applause for excellent presentations. So we are closing this session here with my last word. Particularly my request to our Indian presenters. We need many such initiatives because our cultural heritage is really very vast, and as compared to the heritage available with us, we have very few initiatives like that. So we are very happy to see all these initiatives and look forward to, particularly from an organization which is responsible for preservation of Indian cultural heritage. We will be very happy to collaborate with any of the partners, and whatever resources we have, we'll be happy to share with. Thank you very much. Over to session coordinator.